Communicating clearly and honestly with ISS is important and can make or break what recommendations you receive on your proposals. This is more of an art than a science, so it's worth learning some of the tricks of the trade if you want to look like a hero before your sweet bosses and your board. Otherwise, you might be blaming ISS for a bad result, but you probably didn't do yourself any favors the way you handled yourself, the way you handled your communications today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek. I'm a big fan of you. So no topic raises more ire in the governance world than the merits of ISS. I personally never really understood that. And that remains true today, just like it did 20 years ago. So I urge you to rethink perhaps your bias, to overcome that bias, and spend your energies towards putting your best foot forward when you're dealing with ISS. So I'm not going to make perhaps many friends with this video, and go ahead, give me some negative comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Here are the 6 biggest mistakes that you make that perhaps you can fix. 1, overcome your disdain for ISS. 2, communicate very clearly. 3, don't hold back or misdirect. 4, don't mention that you buy from ISS. 5, provide a one-pager when your proxy is filed. 6, do your homework. 1, overcome your disdain for ISS. So I continue to be surprised how many harbor disdain here. The people at ISS are not radical socialists. Most have a finance or business background. These are normal people. Some of the analysts might be young, but they're not stupid. Their analysis is driven by the policies that their seasoned superiors have concocted, with lots of input from the shareholder clients and a sprinkle from companies too. So they may not know a lot about your company like you do, of course, or your industry perhaps, but you also don't know what they know. They see thousands of companies and what they're doing each year. So you don't have the benefit of that broader perspective. So you might not see the logic of their position, but consider for a moment what their worldview is, where they get to that place. Perhaps what they're saying actually makes sense when you take that into perspective. So there might be other ways you can look at things besides how your company looks at things. So let me end with a note about courteous behavior here. Being belligerent or threatening is not going to get you anywhere. It might intimidate that youngster for a moment, but their boss is going to teach them to ignore that type of thing. So take a deep breath and save yourself the high blood pressure. So let me step back and at least give you my perspective where I think a lot of the misplaced anger towards the proxy advisors come in. A lot of people don't know or they don't think about what they do. The proxy advisors have their own clients, your biggest shareholders, who hire them to give advice, to provide research. So part of that process of setting their own voting policies, the proxy advisors go out annually and canvass their clients, ask them what areas they want to see more research in, where they want the policies to be tweaked, and the institutional investors tell them. So in many ways, the proxy advisors are just reacting to what your biggest shareholders wants. They've been asked by these institutional investors to broaden their research into areas beyond what was traditionally considered, so that, and perhaps to change their positions on some matters that might take you by surprise. So as a result, the proxy advisors likely have a broader view of what governance is compared to what you do. And that's because investors are asking them to do that, to look deeper, to look at a larger span of activities. 2, communicate very clearly. So clear communication is at a premium here. It really could mean the difference between you getting a positive and a negative recommendation. So ask yourself, if I heard this for the first time, could it be misinterpreted? Run your messaging by a colleague who doesn't know the situation. Do they understand it without further explanation? Is there a better way to get the point across? Sometimes there is. Don't assume ISS knows what you're talking about. They're dealing with thousands and thousands of companies. Don't assume that they remember what you and they said at a meeting that was held last year or even a couple of months ago or even last week. It bears repeating. In the not too distant past, every company was clamoring for a meeting with ISS in the fall, those with calendar year, fiscal year ends, with the notion that it would be good to build a relationship with those that work at ISS. And a lot of time was wasted because you go to those meetings and again, things just don't get remembered. Luckily, I think this practice has dropped off somewhat, at least as many came to realize that not much was accomplished, or maybe you're just learning that now during this video. The folks at ISS were meeting with too many people and just don't remember the circumstances when it comes up when it's time to review your proxy a few months later. I mean, they're only human. So the best times to request a meeting is either when you know you're going to have something extraordinary coming up on this year's annual meeting, for this year's proxy, that could be perceived as negative, but you do have a rationale to explain to ISS why it shouldn't be. Or if you received a negative recommendation last year on something that you've now taken steps to fix, or you feel like they've misinterpreted what you were doing. So if you don't have a story like these to tell, do not bother setting up a meeting with ISS just to touch base. Let me cite an example: a failed say on pay or a low vote count for a director that was likely due to an ISS recommendation, although it's never useful to blame ISS for your low vote when meeting with them. Don't use the word blame. If something like this happens and you have taken some type of action in response, set up a meeting with ISS. Don't script out how the meeting will go. If it's a teleconference meeting, ISS can easily determine when someone is just reading from a script rather than just freely talking. Let me say it again. Don't read a script. It gives the appearance that you're trying to hide something, or that those charged with protecting shareholder interests, you cannot be trusted to speak freely. But do have bullets ready to make sure you made all the points that you wanted to make, and also help you get the message across clearly. So you're basically creating a checklist of what you're hoping that gets covered during the meeting. It's like an agenda. Don't use jargon. Don't be esoteric. These types of things only serve to confuse. You want clear communications. So at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control, and what you can control is whether you paint a picture, your situation, in a way that will resonate. 3, don't hold back or misdirect. So if ISS can glean any sense that you're holding back or being duplicitous, things are not going to go well. So screen those on your team that might have these tendencies and make sure they're not part of the meeting. Get everyone on the same page. The purpose of your communications with ISS is to explain to them what's going on. If you're not being straightforward with them, you're not going to achieve your goal. And if you leave out something important that shows up in the proxy, that can change their perception of what was said at the meeting. ISS is going to act accordingly. Here's a no-brainer. Don't put people on your call with ISS that can't answer questions. Make sure you have the right people on the call. Otherwise, that's also going to leave a bad impression. 4, do not mention that you buy from ISS Corporate Solutions. So this one's a biggie. Don't directly mention or even imply that you hire from the other side of ISS. That other side is known as ISS Corporate Solutions. That's the division of ISS that makes ISS so controversial. It's a division that helps companies frame their proposals. In other words, you can hire ISS, this division of ISS, to help you comply with the policies set by the other half of ISS. Confusing, I know. There's the Chinese wall between the two halves. The Chinese wall is required by the SEC. So the two divisions, they don't talk to each other. So if you hire ISS Corporate Solutions to help you frame your proposals, there's actually no guarantee that your proposals are going to receive a positive recommendation from the other half of the ISS. There's no guarantee that they're going to do their job well and get your stuff, passed. So one side of ISS is not supposed to know that the other side, that you buy from the other side. So if you're the one who spills the beans and mentions it, then you're buying from the other side. Bad things might start to happen. The people you mentioned it to might need to run it up, kick it up the chain within ISS. So if you do something like this, it's going to raise the level of scrutiny that ISS gives to your proposals that are in your proxy. They can't afford to be accused of bias towards companies that buy from ISS Corporate Solutions. So ultimately, by mentioning the fact that you're buying from that half, you could ironically wind up with the opposite of the result that you seek. You could wind up with a negative recommendation on something that you might have received a positive one. So again, let me highlight this. Do not mention to ISS that you buy from ISS Corporate Solutions. 5, provide a one-pager when your proxy is filed. So after you file your proxy with the SEC, ISS issues a draft voting report within 21 days. Around the 21st day, ISS provides S&P 500 companies with a draft voting report so they have an opportunity to quickly review the draft and correct any errors. So I'm talking about quickly. Companies only get a short window, 24 to 48 hours before ISS makes the report final and available to its investor clients. So this is a very short window at a very crazed time for ISS staffers, right? They're processing all these different proxies at the same time. And you can't afford to wait until then to try to guide ISS to where you want them to go. You don't want to wait for this 24 to 48 period to fix something that's huge. This is really a period only to correct factual errors, nothing more than that. So to truly guide ISS, you need to act sooner. Smart people at companies send a one-pager to ISS about a week after they file their proxy to the head of research at ISS. This can assist the ISS staffers that will actually review your proxy and analyze it to better understand it when they're deciding their recommendations, what their analysis is, and what their draft recommendations are to their bosses. So, by doing this right after you file your proxy, you're not waiting until 21 days and the draft voting report comes out. By then, it's too late. You want to do this pretty soon after you file your proxy, giving this one pager that ties everything together that IS needs to know in a tight bow. So unintentionally, the SEC's piecemeal adoption of proxy regulations over the years have had the effect of spreading related disclosure throughout the proxy. Some related items might be 30 pages apart on the proxy. So for example, disclosures related to a bonus program might be touched upon in the compensation philosophy section. And then the metrics about this year's goals for the bonus are elsewhere. Then there's the actual achievement and payouts on a totally different page. You get the idea. Help ISS with their only proxy season crush by sending the summary that one describes the biggest items and lists the things that are not in the ordinary course, the things that are not in the ordinary course going on in your proxy. 2, notes on which pages the related disclosures could be found on. And 3, explains why you're doing the things the way you're doing them. So this summary is not a one-size-fits-all exercise, but for some, a grid might work with 3 columns for each of these 3 items that I just mentioned. The key is that you're helping yourself by helping ISS clearly understand what you're doing. 6, do your homework. So know the ISS policies before you argue with them about their policies. I know this seems obvious, but it's worth saying since some don't bother. Make sure everyone on your team that will be on the call with ISS is up to the speed, at least on the policies that will be touched upon. Give them a cheat sheet outlining these policies so that they can refer to it, because everyone's not going on your team, everyone not on the call will not be as well versed in this stuff as you. And I have a separate Vid-Guide about how you can do research on the proxy advisor policies, a link to which is beneath this video.